This is the Other 22 Hours podcast. Hey, and welcome to this week's episode of the Other 22 Hours podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Shafer-Haiss.
And I'm your host, Michaela Anne, and we are coming up on the end of our very first year of hosting this podcast. We've had 45 plus guests since the month of March. And so if you are an early listener, thank you so much for being with us this year. If you're brand new, your first time listening today, thank you for checking us out.
Yeah, and for those of you that are returning listeners and checked out last week's episode with Laura of Years, you might have noticed in the conversation that we dropped that we're taking a little bit of a break. And we have today's episode, and we have an episode coming out next week, and then we're going to take 2 months off from releasing new episodes, take a little bit of our own medicine, and step back, take a breather, work on some other creative endeavors, and then we'll be back at the beginning of March. So in the meantime, we come with our normal ask. The way that we're able to continue doing this show is by having more listeners. And the way we get more listeners is through word of mouth. So if this is your favorite episode, or if maybe you have a favorite episode from earlier in the year, if you wouldn't mind just passing that on to somebody that doesn't know about our show and might get something from it, we'd really appreciate that.
And we're not your typical music promo show. We're not music journalists. We are musicians ourselves. And the whole premise of this podcast is to have conversations about life in the in-between times, how artists and creatives stay connected, healthy, and sane while creating a lifelong career on their art.
As I'm sure we all know, there is a lot in this career that is outside of our control. And so we really like to focus on what is within our control, being our mindsets, our habits, our creativity, our relationship to creativity. And so with that, we've distilled that down to a question that we don't blatantly ask our guests, but it's the core of this show, and that is, what do you do to create sustainability in your lives so that you can sustain your creativity? And we asked that question of Glen Phillips today. He's a singer-songwriter, probably best known as the frontman of seminal 90s band Toad the Wet Sprocket. Glen started with that band when he was 15, and as he shares in this, they didn't even shop for record deals. Somebody from ASCAP started dubbing a demo tape of theirs and sending it to A&R people, and they got an offer from Columbia Records when he was 17 years old. And that went on to have multiple platinum records in the 90s and all come to an end when he was only 27.
Yeah, Glen was very candid, very honest about what that journey is like to have the highest of highs and then some pretty low lows, and how to continue to build a life. Music industry careers are peaks and valleys, and he's definitely experienced that. And it was a really beautiful conversation hearing about some of his mindsets that he's had to work through and getting back to play through music, play in the most playful sense of the word play.
Joyous sense.
Yeah.
Like we said, Glen was very generous with what he's learned. A lot about mindfulness, a lot about the ins and outs of what a career in music looks like today, even if you did have a big band in the 90s. And he has a great sense of humor about all of it. So without further ado, here's our conversation with Glen Phillips.
We've only had this for almost a year now, and I think you are probably our most commercially successful guest, and started at such a young age. So you started touring pretty full time, like by the time you were 18, is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And had pretty massive commercial success like in your early 20s?
And then was pretty much unsignable and done by 27.
Wow.
Wild.
Can you tell us more about that?
Just, how can I say? I mean, the band got to a point where we weren't communicating well, and nobody really put us in a room and was like, by the way, you don't get 2 chances at this. This is probably the only time you get this kind of opportunity in your life. So if you need to do solo projects, go to your solo projects, get some counseling as a band, get some interventions happening, and deal with it, because the chance of lightning striking again is incredibly low. And yeah, we broke up when that was the year my dad died. The band broke up. I had 2 kids, and I couldn't get a record deal anywhere. In walking into A&R places and being embittered is not a great way to get people on your side. So it was really playing the victim, and yeah, nobody wanted to work with me. It was a pretty harrowing time. Took me a while to get over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did that affect your creativity? Did you continue to write through that time, or did you think that maybe hanging up your shoes was the way to go?
I still don't know how to do anything else.
Yeah.
At the time, I mean, it was a combination of feeling really entitled and also feeling like this was God catching up for me for my hubris, thinking I was special or could have a career or could succeed at anything, and the kind of generational familial of like, see, I'm a failure. This is what was always going to happen. And I only got set up to fail. And I got incredibly depressed and did a lot of touring and sent away a lot of audience by going on tour when I probably should have been getting some mental health care. But I had a family to feed, so I just kept going out on the road. In the midst of that, wonderful things also happened. My kids were amazing, and I started playing a lot at Largo in Los Angeles, where a lot of other musicians who suddenly didn't have what were considered viable careers were also playing, and so there was a lot of camaraderie in that. But it was a really hard readjustment.
What were some of the things that you did to help yourself process that and move through it?
At the time, I don't know if I had a lot of knowledge of what resource was available to me in a way that I do now. I did therapy on and off. I was on antidepressants for a while, but it was the family doctor. Hand you the Zoloft and go bye-bye. And I will say it probably saved my life. At the time when I got on it, at the point where my now former wife said you need to go get help, I hadn't read a book in a year. I couldn't concentrate, and anything that was interesting was too emotionally jarring. And there was this week I couldn't sleep for an entire week. I was so anxious, and I went and doctor gave me Zoloft, and I read the whole Dune trilogy in a week and started sleeping again. But once again, they don't do that with, okay, you have to do this much therapy, and we're going to try to get you off of it once you're stabilized and your kind of mental process, you're better. Stuff catches up. If you only kind of address the biological side of it, it doesn't really address the spiritual or mental side of it. So that took a lot longer.
So much of this industry, the music business, I'm constantly at odds and grappling with like how unhealthy I think it is for our brains. How do people stay grounded and spiritually centered if they're like going out in their experiences that they go on a stage and thousands of people just adore them for this one thing that they do constantly, and like the ego and I would think if you're starting that at 18 and in your early 20s when your brain is still developing, like how that informs your mental structure, and this is without having real neurological understanding, I just think it would be that much harder than to deal with the aftermath, which is inevitable for everybody in this industry. Everything that goes up comes down, and it's a really challenging part of this business. But to take in so much validation and be like, oh, I'm good, I'm good, I'm good, and then to just be turned on a small level, it's pretty destructive. On a massive level, and then add in age, it's just like, how could you have experienced that and not had a deep struggle with it?
It's a strange one. And complaining about being a rock star isn't something that's not a good look, right? So it's also, if people are going, what's so sad? It's like, my platinum selling band got dropped. It's like, no one's really going to jump into that victim story. But it's a weird one, too. And it's, any loss of privilege feels like oppression. I've heard that said before. And to have the experience of life going my way without me trying. We worked hard, but we also got incredibly lucky, even getting signed. I tell this story here and there, but like my theater teacher, I started in theater, and my drama teacher in high school, it was his first year as a high school teacher, and he was talking to the class about why he was a teacher and saying just loved the theater more than anything. And he saw his friends going to New York and Los Angeles and Chicago, and he had this realization that he didn't want to spend the rest of his life selling himself, that it would break his heart. And I'm like, that's me. I'm too sensitive. And I thought, okay, I'll be a high school teacher. I'll teach like arts and humanities, maybe I loved sociology, anthropology. Like I thought I would do that. And the band, we hadn't even sent out a demo. We'd recorded like a cassette locally, and then it got into the hands of this guy, Nick Terzo, who at the time was at ASCAP. And he started doing cassette dubs and sending them to A&R people. And so the next thing we knew, we had a record deal. And I'd planned on going up to San Francisco State. I was going to just take that route. Like, my parents are hard science academics. I don't know, that seemed like the path that would have been appropriate for me. Even when we were on the label, I think Donnie Einer could never understand that the president of Columbia, I was so ambivalent about success. I didn't believe in fame. There's a lot of stuff around that concept of success that I never believed in. And I always fought against, and I did a lot of self-sabotage in that as well. There's the part of you that's going, is this real? Is this actually happening? Is this my life? And then there's the other part of you going, I hate celebrity culture. I can't stand it. And that latter where no success is enough. If you're U2, if you're the biggest band in the world, it's still, if you're scaling down even slightly in any given year, it feels like a failure, right? Or
I say yep, like I know, but like,
yep. I know a guy who met Edge and asked him. I did, but there's never ever enough. And I would say late stage capitalism, America in general, you never have enough. It's not built into our culture. You're supposed to get more and borrow against that. So you're always living beyond your means. You never have, whether it's Bhutan or the Netherlands. You know, it's just, I got a flat, I got a bicycle, I got enough medical care if I need it that won't take the house or the bicycle away from me. It's like really basic stuff. And we're always chasing something here. And it's not really good for the soul. I have this theory that all true medicines are turned into drugs in our culture, whether it's music, whether it's spirituality and relationship with whatever God or not. The last few years for me, this is wandering a lot. Like, I found a lot of purpose in getting back to music as something that's not performance oriented. So I started doing community song leading about 7 years ago, which is uplifting songs sung in a circle for each other. And you're kind of, for people, a lot of them have church damage or have been shamed out of thinking they could sing even though they want to, and some of them don't have great voices, but they love singing and they were told to shut up. But standing in a circle, and most of the songs, instead of harmony, they're like contrapuntal, so it's counter melody because non-musicians can handle that better. Simple songs, and you go for about an hour and a half and teach and sing these, and there's no audience, there's no performance. It's like singing for each other the way people did until we figured out how to commodify it. And it's a really beautiful experience. And so for me, stuff like that has made me love music again and realize that you can do it in ways that aren't about getting to the next place. But they're more about being in the place you're at.
That's really beautiful. We've had a few guests share something similar in the sense that your creativity is yours and it is always with you, and your ability to sing, your ability to make music, you can do that anywhere, regardless of whether there's an audience or regardless of whether you're by yourself or whatever it is. And there's just joy in that, in the ability to create this music, in the ability to pull something out of the ether. I think that can easily be overlooked with what you were saying with this capitalistic society of stagnation is the devil, basically, when it's a pretty remarkable thing to just be able to sustain your creativity, especially when you choose to make a career out of that.
I've thought about this a lot recently in these conversations, and I also do songwriting coaching and do like mentorship programs. And I've been a music teacher of vocal coaching and teaching guitar and piano for over a decade. But there's always this idea that in today's society, that if you have any musical talent or ability, you need to commodify it. And for it to be worth anything, it needs to be recognized. Like, are you going on The Voice? Are you going to try out for American Idol? And not this idea that we're all musical creative beings. And we have a 2.5-year-old daughter, and watching her every day just has made me realize so much more. Like, artistry and creativity is human. It's in all of us. It's not something that some of us are blessed with. Everybody does it. They don't care who's listening, if they're what their voice sounds like. They're just like fully present in the moment. I want to color. I want to create. I want to sing a song. It's just as natural as breathing. And that mind shift, it has been interesting for myself of, this isn't something that has to be, oh, I'm so special because I can do this. This is something that like we all have maybe like the necessity to do, to feel alive and feel like we can make sense of our experiences. But we live in a society that has decided that's not the case. And I think it's just not true.
It's a strange thing. Yeah, the segmentation. I don't know if I'd be alive if I didn't have practices that embodied me, right? And there's something about music. It's that people think as well when you're on stage, the best moment is everybody's looking at me. But the best moments on stage are when you disappear. The song is bigger than you, and you have enough ability to let the song take you somewhere unexpected and magical. I mean, it's about non-being more than something egoic and central, or even when you're watching a dance. For me, like the difference between like a Baryshnikov or Michael Flatley, not to bag on Michael Flatley, but I will, like the Lord of the Dance guy, is you see him and you think, oh, he thinks dance is lucky to have him. Whereas Baryshnikov, he feels like he is lucky to have dance. And it's that difference is like, is this something that you're like, me, or it's just like, oh my God, look at what just happened. Look at what just happened. This is a miracle. This is beautiful. Not what I did, what happened. It's amazing. And even if, a 2-year-old drawing like hands with 20 fingers each and purple skin and, all the great weird kid drawings, like just seeing your kids sitting there concentrating for so long on something so hard. And like, there's so much going on in there. It's a way of disappearing into life. And there's different ways to be embodied. I mean, whether it's dance, whether it's music, whether it's theater, drawing, writing, yoga, running, biking, climbing. There's so many ways. Being with animals. They're all really valid and really beautiful. And like I was going to say earlier, I don't know what I would do if I didn't have things that brought me completely into the moment. Because when I'm not in the moment, I'm regretting the past and fearing the future and having all these issues. So I've increasingly recognized and valued that part of it as I get older. As my creativity becomes in some ways more difficult to access on a regular, I feel like I need assignments or play or ways to get back to play and curiosity, ways to get back there instead of like, oh God, when I get home from tour, it's often, what do I got to do now? I got to write the best album I've ever written. I got to write amazing songs that will change the world. And that's like way too much heaviness. I should be, when I get home, like, what do you want to do? It's like, I want to play. I want to have a lot of fun. Like this guitar, like I've been playing it every day, but I haven't really been practicing. So maybe I'll practice and, I do a songwriting group with Matt the Electrician. Do you know him?
Not personally, but yes.
Yeah, I've been terrible at it. I have not been as regular as I should be, but every week he does the Bob Schneider style, sends out a title. Except he, if you don't write the song, doesn't kick you out of the group.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's a little less alpha male than Bob's group. But it's such a wonderful group of songwriters. And, I did my last solo album was all songs from the songwriting game. Just because it's great to get a title and figure out what it's about. It makes it play. And it's like tricking myself into playing instead of hiding in a corner feeling unworthy of the work that I feel I should be producing.
That kind of is a good little segue into this question that I've had, because having platinum records at the time that your band did, in my judgment, is different than having a platinum record today, which is equivalent to, whatever, 1 billion streams. How was that experience with coming back and be like, the next record needs to be better than that?
In our early 20s, we did 2 albums totally independently and just cut them live on the floor. And then when we did the Fear record with All I Want, Walk on the Ocean, I loved big records like Talk Talk and Peter Gabriel, all the productions that Trevor Horn did.
Yeah.
And been listening to this college rock, post-punk stuff, but also I just loved these big Tears for Fears records, just where they cared so much, like the David Sylvian solo stuff with Steve Nye. Like, they're just amazing sounding records. And so we wanted to do something big. And the next record, Dulcinea, we weren't really thinking singles. We were wanting to do something that sounded like we sounded live. 2 guitars, the vocals, 1 extra keyboard, because we usually had a utility guy with us. And we wanted to make something that was more muscular and live. Chuck Plotkin was our A&R guy, and he produced Dylan and Springsteen, and he was just there going like, my job is to protect you guys from the radio guys. I want you guys just to make the best album you want to make, and we'll worry about everything else later. So it was a dream gig.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We just got to do what we wanted to do. On our last record, Coil, we took more money, which we probably shouldn't have done, and all of a sudden there was more pressure, and we had to have singles, and we had an A&R guy who would listen and go, okay, well, it could be a single. That was his only comment on anything, where Chuck's sitting there going like, this is a wild stew, like how do you want to sequence this, because you can do a lot of different emotional journeys with this material, and you really got to think of like where you want to bring people. It was great with him.
That's amazing. We've had John Doe as a guest on here, and he was talking the same thing about a record that X made, and they took more money than they'd ever taken, and it basically, that was like the lineup changes, and it was just, you know, he's like, it's probably our worst record.
I'm assuming it was See How We Are.
It is.
It's a great song. Oh.
Right. It's an amazing, exactly.
Still not a bad record.
Yeah, but in the moment, he's like, you know, there was the pressure. You got this big advance, and all of a sudden, this is stacked against you, and when you stack that pressure against creativity and the ability to, the freedom and the play and the experimentation, it can be daunting.
Yeah. And we went against the grain on our last album. We didn't go with the producer that the company wanted us to go to. And we were told before it came out, we're going to let it get to this point, and once we've made our money back, and then we're pulling the plug. And they did.
Oh, jeez.
You had already released 4 records with them or something? So there was a history there, and they're just like, we don't care. We're just going to make our money and see ya.
Yeah,
more
it was
or less.
more of a he than a they. But yes.
Yeah.
But literally, punitively, you didn't listen to me. You didn't follow my advice. You went with the producer I didn't want you to go with. And let me tell you exactly what's going to happen. And that is exactly what happened. You sign up, you take the money, and you don't play the game. There's a little hubris in that. I mean, it's a silly thing to do. And that was the age, I think, of bands with this indie attitude, signing on major labels and then whining about it. I mean, for me, the 90s was a lot of that. People not wanting to play their singles live and rejecting the radio. And I think people now are like, I would love to have a hit. It's like, I'm going to want to have a kid, medical insurance, you know?
Yeah, it's like, I feel like there was a time that people were like, oh my God, someone's song is on a TV commercial. Oh, selling out. And now I feel like very quickly everyone's like, could I just get a song on a TV commercial? Like the industry like has shifted so much. I'm super curious if you feel comfortable talking about it. I think in a lot of mindsets, you know, you think of people who have like hits in the 90s, oh, you're set for life. But I'm curious what the economics of that, are, especially as it's shifted to streaming. You talk about like, oh, okay, I could be judged of like whining my platinum selling band got dropped. But the reality is you have to keep working. It's not like you can just go to your mansion and cash checks for the rest of your life and be okay, right?
Yeah, I didn't make that much. And I remember we saw our first ever, the way major labels work too, we saw our first ever check, and we made a point. We licensed the first record for $50,000, the second for $75,000. Or wait, was it $25,50? And I think we got $75,000 to record as the advance for everything for the Fear album. Like, we weren't taking big advances. We were taking advances that were only for the recording fund. We were making expensive records in studios. $75,000 now seems like a ton of money to record with, but then again, we all have this setup in our room.
Exactly.
It's different. But back then, if you were doing a full band in the studio, it was going to cost. And we didn't take massive advances, and we took minimal tour support. As soon as we could get off tour support, we did. Our whole idea was that we were getting more points on the back end and that we were going to earn the money we made. And we had sold, I think it was when Dulcinea went platinum. We'd had Fear go platinum and a half, and then when Dulcinea went platinum, that was the month we saw our first ever check from Sony.
Wow.
So, you know, it's one thing to go, they got tons of money. It's another thing we still haven't recouped. Because they were spending it on radio and all these other things. So videos were really expensive to make back then.
Oh, yeah.
And MTV was so we would spend whatever was $75,000 on the record. And then I think we spent $300,000 on a video.
Whoa. Wow.
Like, it's insane. Because they had to get, like, I think it was Sam Bauer, because he directed Smells Like Teen Spirit. So we had to have that guy for the Fall Down. We spent so much money. But that was, once again, major label in the era. I mean, the coming off of that, We haven't had a single placement from the 2 records NDP that we put out when we got back together. Like All I Want gets placed in scenes where there's someone's having a 90s flashback. So those trickle in. We're not a massive streaming band. We weren't that big. And there's no sales anymore. So our living is entirely on the road at this point, almost entirely. And, to give way too many details, like my publishing for everything I've written since Toad, including the newer Toad records, like I didn't make the $100 we'll write you a check barrier for the last quarter. 25 years of my work. So
I appreciate you sharing that with us because, again, another part of this conversation that I feel like there's so much, especially in the music industry, of keeping quiet what the reality of everyone's financial situations are. And it creates this farce. There's such a disconnect in my mind. And I'm constantly like, what's real? Is that band making money on tour? What's success? And like, what does success translate to as far as like actual take home pay? And they look like they're doing well, but that means they're barely making $20,000 a year. Like, I want to know all those things.
Yeah.
And I want to know like what people's bottom lines are, because I spent a long time thinking, I'm just doing this wrong. How come I can't make a living? And as I would start talking about it more people would reveal like, oh yeah, I always lose money in here, or I'm not making money in this, or my royalty checks look like this. And I was like, oh, okay.
But it's different. I know people who never have to leave their house, who make bank off of sync. Nobody knows who they are. They make 3 times what I make, and it's all sync. Or they're scoring, or they're doing other work. Toad does well on the road. We've been working hard. When we got back together, it was very difficult. We had a lot of personal stuff to like either work out or just let ride until, we're not great communicators. So a lot of stuff just had to work itself out over time. But everybody's been in a really good state of mind. You can see the positivity. There were times, I think, when we were on the road where we looked like we hated each other, and we probably did, and didn't want to be there, and we probably didn't. And right now, everybody's good. We're getting along. We're happy to be there. We really care about it. Everybody's invested in it, and it's made a real difference. And so our numbers have been going up, and our job, because we had a large enough audience back in the day, has been simply reconnecting with the people I meet every day. I mean, once again, this is an incredibly lucky position, is I get to bump into people who go like, you're in Toad? Like, you're one of my favorite bands. Do you ever play anymore? What do you do now? It's like, tour every year. And that's the guy that I want to come to the show. My job is to get that guy going. And even through my solo stuff, like I have a very engaged but very small audience. My Spotify, I'm like 7,000 monthly listeners. Once again, I know people who can't tour, never had a hit in their life. They got one song on a good playlist and they have like 10 times the amount of listeners I have. Like, I have no listeners on Spotify. It just doesn't exist for me. But I can go to city wineries and fill them. And so I've worked on the live thing for 20 years. I would like to be able to afford to stay home more. But then again, a lot of those options require being a talking head on the internet or TikToking or doing these things that I just don't want to be in that business either. So at some point, we all have a day job, right? Even if you're on the road, you're a truck driver all day. When I'm out solo, I make enough that it's worth it, even though car rental's up, gas is up, lodging is up. I mostly tour when I can. I take my friend Jonathan Kingham with me. He's a Nashville guy, my best friend. We all like finding weird restaurants in the middle of nowhere, like great conversations. We share a room half the time because it's like he'll open for me and I'll pay him, and we make it all work and we save money on it. But I don't have a merch guy or a tour man. I do everything. Just got a manager for the first time in I think 8 years. I just got a manager again, which for me to trust that and accept the help and not be like, you'll do it wrong. You'll do it too expensive. That's my experience with managers in the past is they'll take care of your travel, but you'll spend twice as much. Toad is doing well enough right now that I can afford to feel less scarce with everything else and less panicked. I mean, I got divorced 10 years ago, and yeah, it was a huge change in my life. And this worry, okay, I got to start saving again. I don't have a house, and almost bought one before lockdown and didn't, which was, in hindsight, a really terrible decision, because now I probably never will be able to. But it's weird. I know I'm one of the lucky guys because I have friends who work so hard, and on the other hand, the people who aren't like the lead singer from a 90s band that did well develop other skills and are more targeted in them. And so it's like lockdown, I started doing more songwriting teaching online, but I never got to the point of like hanging out a shingle or making a coursework or doing the smart things that you do. But people were asking, so I was like, yeah, okay, pay me, we'll go on Zoom. Yeah, great. And doing the, song leading, the community singing stuff, but that's less about money and more just about love. Figuring out different things. Just was talking to a voice acting director. I'm really hoping I can get voice acting work because like for me, it's like get to still play for a living, make silly voices, hopefully get my after insurance again.
I will say your voice is very pleasing.
Yeah.
We've, I think this will be our
Why, thank
45th
you.
episode. We've listened to a lot of voices through headphones, and yours is very
I'm
pleasing.
feeling very
I'm
relaxed.
glad I'm soothing. Maybe I'll do meditation tapes. Actually, I did this
Yeah.
audition for this woman, and she said, you sound like a therapist. Could you go back? This is supposed to be an asshole superhero. It's not a therapist.
Well, I think though what you're sharing is like, again, what's so tricky sometimes in this business, the core is your music, but then you need to survive, you need to pay your bills, and then you also like need to convince people that you're doing well enough to want to work with you or want to come to your shows. And there's all these different metrics, and like you said, your Spotify isn't blasting off, but you're able to sell tickets. And it's just a really good reminder that there's so many different areas of this business, not getting too caught up in like setting your worth to be determined by one of them, and having to have the flexibility to keep going with wherever it seems like, okay, this is working, I'm going to focus here. And then what energy do I need to try and build somewhere else?
We're all sold on a bit of a dream that we want to be the guy out in front or the girl out in front, right? We're that person who's the star or the star producer or the star. And there are so many niches available for everybody. I think some of what I was saying earlier is I think of my friends who often lose money on tour and they've gone more into songwriting placement, like Garrison Starr. Do you know her?
I know the name.
Yeah, not
Amazing singer. And I love this year, then like the last year and everything, Indigo Girls have taken her out on the road and had her up to sing like they've been platforming her. And she's so damn good. And she has so much heart. Great songwriter. Years ago, I remember when, songwriters would complain about, it's not working. And then you'd bring up David Mead. And David Mead is one of the best songwriters ever. He made these records, like you listen to them and they're like Paul McCartney level hit. Just like, oh my God, this song's good. They're so smart. They're so good. And I think he's paying the rent more with real estate and does well. And he's got a comfortable life. And I think he's happy and gets to make music because he loves it now. But I remember touring and I would meet musicians and we'd talk about like David Mead. God damn. If that guy is not on the charts, it's broken, right? Then it's not personal anymore. I think of that with Garrison. I think of that with him. I think like there's those artists where they're as good as anything and better than most. And they're working their asses off. That's the weird thing. And then there's this setup where somehow they're a failure or a dropped ball. And we're squeezing everybody through this tiny tube of a particular kind of attention and pay. And the people I know who've been on all the edges of that, or I think like Ruby Amanfu, just years and years of like working, singing, like being on the side and like breaking through as a songwriter, once again, being platformed by other artists, like finally getting visibility and being able to like make a serious splash. But finding that path can take a very long time. And for some people, the piece at the end of the day is returning. I haven't talked to David about it, but that idea of if you're returning music to this place where it's instead of the thing that's torturing you and that you're not doing what you feel like you should be doing at, you can return it to the thing you go do when you play. And you can return it to the thing that gives you joy. And my daughter Freya is my youngest daughter. She's 22 now, and she's got the voice of an angel. She's just the most beautiful singer. And I made a point of never pushing her, but in high school, she was playing shows with a friend and people were freaking out because her voice is so amazing. And she didn't like the attention. She didn't like being on stage. She teaches kindergarten now and she does nannying and she likes singing to kids.
Yeah.
Perfectly happy. Doesn't want to do it in a club.
Yeah.
She's smart.
Yeah. It's like,
Yeah.
and she gets to keep loving singing.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
amazing. I made a little EP for an artist this spring. He has a great voice, really great finger-picky guitar player. He works for the State Department, and he's a diplomat, and he's very straightforward. Like, no, being a diplomat, like, I wanted to do this. I went to Columbia and studied foreign relations because I wanted to be a diplomat. I love international policy. I love communication and talking and resolving differences through communication. And so I'm doing my dream job, but I also like to make music. I might play a show here or there when I'm not out on assignment, but like this is my passion, and my dream job is actually being in the State, and it's beautiful. I read this. It's not a great book. It's called Real Artists Don't Starve, and I'll save everybody the $9.99 or whatever. The key chapter or sentence basically is throughout history, artists have always had benefactors. Michelangelo worked on commission, and sometimes that benefactor is a day job or some steady job that allows you the freedom financially and mentally to create the art that you want to create and enjoy it.
And the people I know who do that, once again, the ones who weren't the singer-songwriter, because I just went out solo thinking I could continue in that way. And that's the thing. They have their music editors. They're doing soundtracks. They're doing music for sync. They're writing songs for kids shows. They're working at publishing companies, doing anything. And they feel often successful and satisfied. And they maybe get that wistful, if I could, yeah, but I wasn't ever going to be Bruce Springsteen. Fine.
I feel like that dream that so many of us start with, when you start to realize like being Bruce Springsteen or being the Rolling Stones is such a small percentage of musicians that will make it
It's
to that height.
statistical noise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But even reaching like great levels of success and awards and accolades, what's been kind of forming more in my mind is just how fleeting those high moments are. And that's actually not what to build a career on. That those are great if they happen. But I was thinking about this the other day of like how much my younger self thought of certain gigs or different things I was doing as just a means to an end. I'll suffer through these shows or this tour or whatever to get to the next thing, whatever that next thing is. And I've recently, obviously, like having a child, like everything recalibrates. How do I want to spend my time? How do I want to spend my money? I'm not just all in 100% of, yes, I will do any opportunity that comes my way to play music. There's a lot more to consider. And I really recently had that idea of like, I don't want to do things that I think are just a means to the next thing. I want to play a bar gig because I want to play a bar gig. I want to play a living room house concert because I want to play that living room house concert. Because I think that was operating on this value system of what level was valued as an artist or a musician. That's where you got to get or you're a failure. So this is a stepping stone. And my mind, thankfully, especially because of all these conversations we get to have on the other 22 hours, has really been shifting of you have to want to do whatever you're doing to really enjoy it.
Hopefully, yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you want to. If you want to enjoy it. And it's even understanding, if there's the rule of private gigs, corporate gigs, where the more they pay you, the less the audience will listen. It's almost inverse. Like, if I do that show, I can be home more days this month. But nobody's going to listen to a single song. But it's like, that's cool. It's worth it. It's worth the days at home. My current manager, it's like one of the things I like about him is he talks about the power of saying no and creating not tons of scarcity, but a little bit of, anticipation on an audience and keeping your mystery going. Like that idea that they shouldn't know everything about you all the time. There's being present, but leave a little mystery in there. Don't say yes to everything. Like you don't need to be out there desperately trying to do everything. And that can be really hard to trust. I've had, back to my psychological profile, it's been a thing I've been thinking about recently. Like the men in my family, we have this thing of we're creative and decent people, but there's 3 generations of feeling kind of like a failure. And I feel like My dad was a brilliant scientist, but not a great businessman. And he would collapse into that. Like, I've realized, like, it took me 50 years, but it's like, God, I'm a lot like my dad like that. He was a lot like, his dad was this, intellectual and jazz musician. He got knocked out of all his dreams by the Depression and never forgave the world for disappointing him, and died from a heart attack at 50 as an alcoholic. And so that bitterness, there's parts of that that are in the family, and getting to look at my life and see it in terms of gratitude instead of in terms of victimhood is, number one, it's a truer portrait of it. And number two, like, getting out of a scarcity mindset. And I'm not saying that there's a whole, like, wellness world, like, you got to leave, you got to go to an abundance mindset, and then life will shower you with shit. I don't believe in that either. I want to be perfectly clear.
But you live in Santa Barbara.
I was born in Santa Barbara. I'm paying stupid rent to stay in Santa Barbara.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a beautiful place worth living. I was just making a comment on the new age spirituality that's there.
Oh, there's that. Yeah. It's totally new agey here. Yes. But that idea of having some kind of attitude that's not based on, like, I'll never have enough. It makes you make stupid decisions, non-creative decisions, panicked decisions. You should have your eye on the future enough to not be an idiot. And things that I didn't do when there was more money were like, invest it. Back when it would have made a massive difference. But I always thought the economy was about to crash, so I never did.
You've made so many great points there. I think about these kind of anxiety-driven panic decisions when you're stuck in this scarcity mindset of you're falling down an elevator shaft, and the first thing to grab onto, you're going to. It's just human instinct when you're operating in that anxiety. And then on the power of saying no and keeping kind of an abundant mindset. You had mentioned Largo earlier, and we had a conversation. One of our first was with Kenneth and Joey from the Milk Carton Kids.
Yeah.
And Joey had this great viewpoint on saying no to things. He's like, don't look at it as like turning something down. Look at it as what you're saying yes to. By saying no to this one thing, you're leaving the possibility of having more time at home, more time to write. If it doesn't feel right, by turning something down, you're saying yes to all of these other things that can be more fulfilling or more sustainable or on and on.
It's crazy how simple that is, but how, whoa, it actually feels to think about that. Any opportunity, it's always the focus of like, if I say no, I'm going to miss out on this. And like, not once have I ever thought, but what are you then opening yourself up to by not doing that? Until Joey said that.
Well, and there's also thinking of learning to identify your resistance. Is my resistance a gut feeling that this is not really the right thing to be doing? Or is my resistance because this is touching on a deep-seated fear? Is it tickling my anxiety in a way that's like the thing I should lean into? Or is it actually giving me a proper warning sign of, this isn't worth your time, this isn't your scene?
That's a powerful differentiation there.
And it can be a really hard one to make. It can be a
Super
very
hard.
difficult one.
I feel like I've lived most of my adult life confusing feelings of my body warning me with, oh, this is exciting anxiety that I need to lean into and chase after. And it always ends poorly. And only in recent years have I thought, oh, that feeling that comes up, that's like anxiety saying, protect yourself, stay home. And my younger self was like, I'm chasing that. I feel anxious and unsafe. I'm going to go straight into the fire and whatever that is. And it's crazy to differentiate between those two truths.
In my dating years, I got really in touch with that. I'm remarried again this year.
Congratulations.
And thank you. But there was that dating thing of, oh, this person I get really wound up around. It's like, nope, that's an alarm system. That's not love. That's alarms. So figured that one out eventually. And once again, I've thought for a while that maybe it's easiest to make art if you are poor or rich. Like if you have a trust fund and you can't fail, then you're free. You can do what you want. If it doesn't work, it's fine. You get to do it again. If you don't have anything, at least if you have just enough to make the art itself, if you can't actually get a guitar, get to a gig, there's a certain entry level of privilege, buy paint, whatever it may be. But you also have nothing to lose. And I think if you have a kind of middle class range, you're getting by. You're a full-time artist of some kind, but you're not killing it. That, to me, is where the mind rats come in, because you do have stuff to lose. And making it as an artist, there's, at least with a certain personality, less room for error, or it can feel like there's less room for error. This is the thing I've been trying to get myself out of. Maybe that's just an excuse on my part, but it's this like, well, if I don't do this, if I take a risk on this, like the stakes are too high, and doing what's safe over and over because I know it'll pay the bills and then I'm doing that. I'm on the road for 6 months a year and I'm not happy because I'm never home.
You're like currently comfortable enough where it's hard to push yourself.
Sometimes I feel like I can get there, and if I can come up with an idea that I actually really believe in and I'm excited about, I can move forward on that. That's why for me it's the return to play, and not saying play as something casual, but I mean, you know, you play guitar, right? That's the right verb for it. You play piano, but it's a high level, well-educated play. Just because it's called play doesn't mean it's necessarily frivolous, but it's to get back in a mindset where I'm willing to, rather than think I gotta write like such a deep heartbreak, like I need to connect so deeply, just write obla-dee obla-da, right?
Yeah.
Delightful, immortal crap.
Yeah.
You know?
I love it. That feels great. Those songs and those experiences occupy a really important space, whether you release the song or not. I like to have a hard drive that's sitting underneath my desk here that is songs that I've written and made here that are never going to be released. But the idea is that it's me playing. You know, I can just throw some paint at the wall and it might be really ugly, and that's okay. Like allowing myself the freedom to let it be really ugly, and that's cool.
And it's a thing about being in a place like Nashville too. I went there for 6 months and then came back home. And I'm close to LA, but I haven't been going down there regularly in years, and I'd really like to again. The thing about being in Santa Barbara is we get, you know, as far as artists, there's a handful of touring artists. There's a lot of like quasi-retirees, like Martin Gore is not going to write with me. I go to LA or Nashville, and you just get coffee in Nashville, and you end up with a co-write because there's songwriters there, and you go, oh my God, I haven't seen, like, I loved being there, and I wrote 5 days a week, you know, at least one session, and it's like I was in good shape as a writer there just because of the company, and almost none of those songs found their way anywhere. But the experience of writing with people, getting to know people that way, I mean, it's profound. I think that's part of the being at home as a musician. When we were young and I was touring, I had young kids, I would get home and I would just go into kid mode, play, clean, cook. You know, it was great. I loved being, when I was home, a completely available dad. It was fantastic. And then my kids got older and I didn't know how to be at home really well. I didn't know how to manage my time or work on long-term projects. I would get home and I would just feel like an idiot. I remember my ex actually coming on tour towards the end of the marriage, and it was just like we were playing at City Winery in New York, needed to get the hotel, check in, get back, get merch, do everything, and she just had this moment of like, you're really good at this. You're really good at this. It's like, yeah, I do. This is my job. And she didn't know how to say, but she hadn't seen me be like that at home. Like this realization that I was very competent in in the world in which I worked, but I was not very competent in being a partner at home. Once the kids were older and didn't need me, I didn't know how to do it. So I think for people who are in a music city, it's a huge leg up, like at any level. Once again, whether you're making a living as a musician or whether you're open micing and just trying to find people to write with, like Nashville is full of people who just want to be near music. That part of whatever it is, the other 22 hours, being able to do stuff that is this hybrid of your social world and your professional world. Like that's the thing with Largo, or going and playing Watkins Family Hour. Everybody would just go, like my favorite musical experiences, some of them were just being at their house after Watkins Family Hour, and everybody just keep playing till 2 a.m. And it was so amazing and had nothing to do with getting ahead. It wasn't about opportunity. It was just about loving playing music. And you have to be in the right places for that to happen, with the right groups of musicians and the right attitudes. And there is, I think, something in that middle-class musician Nashville thing of people who, everyone's gone up, everyone's had their hit, everyone's had their big year, their small year. It's a job there in a way that it I would say even in LA, like people are trying to get into film. There's still nothing is ever enough, where I feel like there's more of an attitude in Nashville of it's a hard business and people are trying to figure out how to make it work, but it's a normal business. And that attitude just in itself is so refreshing, to not be some weird unicorn on your own, but to be in a neighborhood, to live across the street from somebody where you can go, can't find my 57, I'm doing a drum session. Like,
it's
sure.
very much that. That's, we moved down. We lived in New York City for 12 years before we came down. And when we came down to look for a house to rent, every person that we met with to see a house is like, this is a heartbreak town. Until you get a couple number ones under your belt, it's going to be real hard. And these are just real estate agents telling us that. And then a few years later, when we were looking to buy a house, it kind of really clicked that we had mortgage underwriters and stuff that could look at us as two musicians and understand, oh, she has a record deal, and oh, she was recording a record this year and touring this year, so income is all over the place. And Dwayne Eddy's daughter was going to write us a loan. Like, this is the Music City thing, where it's, nobody bats an eye when you meet Joe in line at the post office and you're like, oh, I'm a musician. They're like, yep, cool.
Yeah.
Well, and I think there's also, like, we're in our mid to late 30s, and for me, it feels like a really nice beginning of a new phase, because I feel like in your 20s, especially in early 30s, like so many of all of us were like a little more frenzied, trying to get the thing and get a record deal. And this is all also on a low, like, not like a mainstream, massively successful level. This is like indie labels, Americana world. And I feel like so many of us in our kind of friend group and age group have been in this long enough to be like, okay, this is what we're doing for life, and our expectations are shifting, and we've all gotten our little different tastes and buzzy years, and it's come down, and a lot of people getting more to the place of like, oh, okay, the industry doesn't determine who we are as artists. It's really fickle. It's not personal. Who's chosen or not is going to shift year to year, but we all play music. At different times, I think we've taken for granted living in a town where all of our friends are musicians, and it can feel pretty oppressive. And oh my God, we need to find a friend who's a scientist or do something else. But recently I've felt so lucky of like how fun it is to collaborate with people. Not because we're going to make a record that's hopefully going to get a deal and make some playlist on Spotify, just because it's so fun to get to create with somebody else.
And especially at a high level.
Yeah, when people are really good at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went on a writer's retreat recently with 3 girlfriends who are all great musicians and songwriters. And we wrote songs all day, separately and together. And then we had dinner. And then we, just for fun, wrote songs, just the 4 of us as a group. And I was like, how fun is this? We weren't like, all right, we're tired of working, we're going to like watch a movie. We just like kept wanting to write songs together. And I was like, this is so fun that these are my friends who I love, who I also think are so skilled at what they do. And we get this experience of creating together.
I'm envious. That sounds amazing.
It was,
but
it's
you. True, the community part. And once again, doing it for the love of it. And if you're doing it for the love of it, and I think this is the thing in Nashville that I see in the friends I know who work there, you do it for the love of it, and it ends up becoming usually enough. It's not about leapfrogging. There's something about generosity. There's something about openness. There's friendliness, not working on stuff just because you think it's great or would be fun. And it's not the answer for everyone, but it seems at some point that's like the best answer you can get, is doing it for the love and then seeing what emerges. And that once again, like, marquee billing is overrated. If you're doing well and respected as a vocal coach, teacher, or songwriting, like, it can be extremely lucrative and not overtake your life, and you can know that you're making the world a better place and helping people and doing something good, making people's lives better and making more art come out just through those things. And at the same time, you can maintain your anonymity and do whatever you want creatively. You can get as weird as you want. It's great.
That's a really beautiful kind of spot to put a bow on the conversation. We've really enjoyed having you on here. Thank you for being so candid and so generous with your experiences and your insights.
If you ever need any non-AI voiceover work, please contact me.
We don't have advertisers yet for this podcast, so we can give you a spot.
Fantastic. Sleep Number or Helix? What are you going to go with?
Yeah. I'll take a Sleep Number. That's fine.
You'll take the Sleep Number? Okay. They've been doing less podcast advertising.
Well, thank you so much. It's been so cool to get to talk to you, and maybe someday we'll see you in Santa Barbara.
Yeah. Or I will see you in Nashville.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank
Good to
you.
meet
Have
you.
a great week.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Other 22 Hours podcast. You can find more info on this episode, including links to things that we talked about, by going to theother22hours.com and clicking on episodes.
Reviews go a long way in getting our show in front of more listeners. So if you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to go leave a quick review wherever you listen to podcasts. And we'll see you back here next week for another episode.